Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The Delaware jury reviewing the Hunter Biden gun trial today quickly found him guilty of federal felony gun charges. They deliberated for about 3 hours. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more details.
After less than 4 hours of deliberations, a Delaware jury found the president's son, Hunter Biden, guilty of 3 felony gun charges. The younger Biden has been found guilty of 2 counts of making false statements. This relates to his answer of no on a mandatory gun registration form to the question of whether or not he was addicted to or taking illegal drugs. The 3rd count was possessing a firearm while addicted to drugs. Hunter Biden had pleaded not guilty to all charges, but the jury decided that he knew he was addicted to crack cocaine when he completed that form, and that he continued to use illegal drugs in the days after he purchased the gun. The first son faces up to 25 years in prison and up to a $750,000 fine. He likely will not receive the maximum sentence as a first-time offender. The judge will decide whether or not he gets prison time after a sentencing hearing that hasn't been scheduled yet. Here's what Special Counsel David Weiss said.
No one in this country is above the law. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant. However, Hunter Biden should be no more accountable than any other citizen convicted of this same conduct.
The first son showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He said in a statement, "I am more grateful today for the love and support I experienced this last week from Melissa, my family, my friends, and my community than I am disappointed by the outcome." President Biden was set to address gun safety at an annual conference hours after his son was convicted. He said in a statement, "Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man he is today." Former President Trump's campaign said in a statement, "This trial has been nothing more than a distraction from the real crimes," referring to accusations made by the House Oversight Committee that the Biden family has received millions of dollars from foreign countries. House Speaker Mike Johnson also weighed in. He said the verdict was appropriate. Comparing the outcome to the Trump business records case, he said every case is different, and clearly the evidence was overwhelming here. I don't think that's the case in the Trump trial.
And Arlene, juror number 10 was interviewed by Fox News. He said he didn't know much about the case before he was on the jury. What did he have to say about this verdict?
Well, he's also one of the jurors who owned a gun, and he also had 2 family members who were struggling with addiction. Now, he said he was nervous when they were going into the deliberations, but he tried to focus on why the president's son was in the trial. Now, let me talk about a little bit more of his quotes from the interview. He said about Hunter Biden, he said, "I think he's just like anybody else. Nobody's above the law, no matter who you are, so that did not play in the factoring in his decision." He also said the decision to convict was not politically motivated and that politics played no part in this whatsoever. We just followed the rules.
Arlene, thank you for that.
Right.
Hours after Hunter Biden's convicted on gun charges, President Biden speaking on gun restriction measures at a previously scheduled event in Washington. And tomorrow, the president is set to leave for Italy to attend the G7 summit. NTD's Iris Tao has more from Bari, Italy.
President Biden, addressing survivors of gun-related violence, highlights his administration's work on gun control.
Whether we're Democrats or Republicans, we want our families to be safe. We all want to drop them off at a house of worship, a mall, a movie theater, a school, without worrying it's the last time I'm going to get to see them.
The speech comes just hours after his son Hunter Biden was found guilty on gun charges. Biden did not address the verdict in the speech, but issued a statement earlier today saying he will accept the outcome of this case and that he's proud of his son for his recovery from addiction. Last week, Biden said he would not pardon his son if he's found guilty. Biden's Tuesday speech on guns was previously scheduled, and it comes as Biden's campaign is ramping up its messaging on the issue to target Biden's 2024 rival.
And by doing nothing, he made the situation considerably worse.
Former President Trump has vowed to roll back Biden's gun rules, saying,
"But the Second Amendment will be, it's under siege. but with me, they never get anywhere.
And Trump's campaign on Tuesday linked Hunter's conviction to Biden's presidency. After Hunter's conviction, Biden changed his schedule and returned to Delaware. He's still set to fly out on Wednesday for the G7 summit here in Italy. The White House told us he would talk with G7 leaders about democracy, ally support for Ukraine, and China support for Russia. Reporting from Bari, Italy, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with family members of hostages in Israel before flying to Jordan. And he also gave an update on the latest ceasefire deal. NTD's Jason Perry has the war update.
Family members of hostages rallied in Tel Aviv on Tuesday during Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to Israel. And while there, Blinken met with some of the family members.
Blinken came, he's been here multiple times, he shook our hand, he spoke to us, he reassured us that they're doing everything possible. And our message to him was that we have to bring home every single hostage.
We call upon Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire immediately. The ceasefire is good for the hostages. Fighting is bad for them. It's as simple as that.
Blinken had this to say about the latest ceasefire proposal put forward by President Biden.
And then yesterday, the United Nations Security Council, in effect speaking for the entire international community, made it as clear as it possibly could be that this is what the world is looking for. 14 votes for, no votes against. Everyone's vote is in, except for one vote, and that's Hamas.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been skeptical of the deal as he remains committed to destroying Hamas, while Hamas has stood firm in its demand for Israel to end the war completely before they will release the approximately 120 hostages. After leaving Israel, Blinken met with officials at a conference in Jordan, where he announced an additional $404 million in assistance for the people in the Gaza Strip. And in the Gaza Strip, residents shared their thoughts on the latest UN ceasefire resolution.
There have been several attempts at a ceasefire, and we hope that it will be implemented by all parties and that no party will oppose it.
We hope to God that we will return. It is enough. We are tired. The situation cannot be described.
And across Israel's northern border, the Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon released a video on Tuesday claiming to show them destroying an Israeli drone. And on that same day, the Israel Defense Forces said about 50 projectiles crossed from Lebanon to an area in northern Israel. Many of them were intercepted by Israel's air defense systems, and no injuries were reported. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The U.S. Coast Guard sending home over 300 immigrants trying to enter the country illegally. That says Canada is allocating money to deal with the influx of people. NTD's Arian Pastar has the immigration update.
The U.S. Coast Guard returned over 300 migrants to the Bahamas and Haiti in recent days. That's after they tried entering the country legally multiple times. The operation started after a tip from Customs and Border Protection. The Coast Guard issued a message saying, "Don't take to the sea and risk your life just to be sent back. Use the safe, orderly and lawful pathways available." In Canada, the federal government says it will give Quebec $750 million. That's to help pay for a surge in temporary immigrants. The province now has some 560,000 temporary immigrants. The number has almost doubled in 2 years. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says, "I think that we see across the country there are a lot of challenges regarding social services, housing, healthcare, for which immigrants can't receive all the blame." He added that Quebec is aiming to reduce immigration. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
A suspect has been arrested in the stabbing of 4 U.S. college instructors in China. The incident occurred in a busy public park in broad daylight yesterday. Iowa State Representative Adam Zabner says his brother David Zabner was one of the victims. The educators were from Iowa's Cornell College, a private liberal arts school in Iowa. The college says they were wounded in a serious incident while participating in a partnership program with a university in Jilin in northeastern China. Chinese police identified the suspect as a 55-year-old man named Cui. According to authorities, Cui, quote, collided with a foreigner while walking in the park. State Representative Zabner said his brother is doing well, has been stitched up, and seems to be recovering. The U.S. State Department told NTD that it was aware of the reports and is monitoring the situation. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 3 Russian warships and a nuclear-powered submarine are on their way to Cuba for military drills. The U.S. Navy is deploying destroyers to shadow the Russian ships. What this means for peace and stability in the Caribbean. Earlier, we spoke with retired U.S. Army Colonel John Mills to find out. Mills is also a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. John Mills, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Tiffany, thank you. Always an honor to be on the show with you.
Well, John, while tensions remain high around the world, it seems now there's growing focus close to the U.S. as 2 U.S. Navy destroyers are shadowing 3 Russian Navy ships and 1 nuclear-powered submarine. Now, this is off of Florida's coast. They're on their way to Cuba. Now, Cuba's foreign ministry assuring that the president's, quote, does not represent a threat to the region. How do you read this?
Well, Tiffany, there's many points to take away from this. One is this is a return to the old days where the Soviet Union used to regularly visit Cuba, and Cuba was an outpost of communist insurgency in the Americas. But at the same time, we had a very strong naval presence and an ability to react, and also we enforced the Monroe Doctrine. I would say you also have to look at this. This is a coordinated message on behalf of Russia and China to essentially challenge America in our own front yard. I think our ability is very limited. Our naval forces are strained, and this is a very concerning event.
To your point, this isn't the first time Russia has sent its warships into the region, but this is the first time after Russian President Vladimir Putin was warning that Moscow could respond after Ukraine started using U.S. weapons to targets inside Russia. Given that, should we be more concerned about this Russian flotilla?
I would, and I don't think the Biden team takes these things very seriously. They don't take the Monroe Doctrine seriously. They kind of slough off this event, but I think it is related. The Biden administration is not thinking this through about other ramifications of allowing U.S. weapons to be fired into Russian territory by Ukraine. And it is also, this always has to be placed in context of the China-led coalition to topple America. So China benefits from this also because this challenges America in the Americas.
Now, to your point, the Biden administration officials said this was, quote, a notable event, but not concerning. That's according to the Associated Press. Now, these Russian ships will be in Havana starting tomorrow, and then they'll stay there until the 17th. Given that, what should we be looking out for here?
Well, this could be potentially putting forces in place in case there is the use of American weapons by Ukraine into Russian territory. Let's also say this could be potential covering force for if Venezuela moves against Guyana, and also I'm gonna make a reason-based observation that we may already be living a second Cuban Missile Crisis with the announcement last year of China that not only they helping to reopen the spy base at Lourdes next to Havana, but they're also doing military training. Now, it's been when China has established overseas installations such as Djibouti. What do? They put air defense missiles. And the S-300, S-400 are long-range air defense missiles. The S-400 is nuclear capable, and also it's dual use, not just surface to air, but surface to surface. I have low confidence that the American intelligence community is even watching this or applying resources to understand if China has already placed S-300, S-400 missiles in Cuba, which again is not was actually in accordance with how they project forces such as Djibouti. So I don't think we even have intel community resources determining whether there are these long-range missiles already back in Cuba.
Now, many are noting when it comes to this Russian flotilla that militaries have the right to conduct military exercises in international waters. Now, given the tensions we are seeing around the world, though, what should the U.S. response be to all of this?
Well, we should aggressively shadow these Russian forces. The reality is our Fourth Fleet, and that's the naval component of Southern Command, is very limited. And every Arleigh Burke destroyer we have to pull off mission from somewhere else. I mean, that takes away a ship from somewhere else in the world, because every surface combatant Arleigh Burke destroyer is essentially in maintenance or in preparation for deployment overseas, the Middle East, Western Pacific. So that means we have to pull Arleigh Burkes off. The Fourth Fleet has some of these smaller littoral combat ships, but these are not equipped with surface-to-surface missiles. They have one small cannon, and they are not much more heavily armed than a Coast Guard cutter. So we are stressed to project naval force to shadow them. That's what we should be doing. We're having a challenge collecting enough hulls to actually do this shadowing of the Russian flotilla.
To your point, it seems there are reports that U.S. and Canadian ships are shadowing these Russian ships. So it sounds like they are doing that part. John Mills, thank you so much for your time.
Tiffany, thank you so much.
Back in the U.S. with Nevada Senate primary race now in full swing, a former U.S. Army veteran is taking a commanding lead in securing the Republican nomination. Will he be the one to turn the tide in a Democrat-controlled Senate? NTD's Sam Wong has the latest.
Nevada Republicans are heading to the polls on Tuesday to pick a candidate that can potentially take on the incumbent Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen. Among a crowded list of options, former Army Captain Sam Brown is taking the lead in this race. The Purple Heart recipient, who was wounded while serving in Afghanistan, gained popularity among voters ever since he announced his run last year. He was awarded with an endorsement from former President Trump late Sunday evening, along with support from prominent Senate Republicans Mitch McConnell and Steve Daines. Notably, Daines chairs the committee in charge of fundraising for GOP candidates. Nevada is one of the few swing states that will determine the winner of the White House and the Senate. But a split appears to be taking shape within the Silver State Republicans. Brown is currently running against Jeff Gunter, a dermatologist who served as former ambassador to Iceland under the Trump administration. Meanwhile, Trump is slated to meet with Senate Republicans on Thursday. According to the GOP leadership, senators will hear directly from the former president about his plan for the summer and lay out a, quote, strategic governing agenda in 2025. Worth noting, the Senate has the power to confirm or turn down presidential nominees, including Supreme Court justices. Trump has already lined up a number of vice presidential candidates, including 3 in the upper chamber of Congress: Marco Rubio from Florida, Tim Scott from South Carolina, and J.D. Vance from Ohio. As suspense mounts over who will take the post, Trump said he will announce his choice at the Republican National Convention in July. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Sam Wong, NTD News.
The Federal Election Commission expects artificial intelligence to threaten the integrity of our elections ahead of November. Agency and government leaders have growing concerns that AI-generated content, such as deepfakes, could mislead voters. NTD's Andrew Thomas speaks with an artificial intelligence specialist to learn more about the potential risks.
The Federal Election Commission is sounding the alarm on artificial intelligence. Technologist Alexander de Ritter says the threat of AI interfering in our electoral process is multifaceted. He cites AI's ability to copy a candidate's voice.
With just a number of seconds of someone's voice, you can create credible AI clones. And so if you get a phone call from a politician or what sounds like a politician, do not immediately believe it just because it sounds like that politician.
AI is evolving so rapidly that it's starting to learn how users feel, and those feelings can be manipulated.
Artificial intelligence has gotten more emotionally aware. So in the last year, we have seen artificial intelligence that can pick up on a voice emotion in a conversation and adapt its responses based on that. And so that yields for more persuasive, human-like conversations.
Mis and disinformation were a huge concern during the 2020 presidential race. But is seeing really believing anymore?
AI can now generate persuasive video. And, it is not perfect. You can definitely still tell that it is AI generated. But it feels like we're just like one innovation away from it crossing the uncanny valley, where it becomes really hard to distinguish.
DeRitter explains that AI also poses a more direct threat to our elections.
You can now have AI look for vulnerabilities in code that previously humans might have not found. So that means AI can more quickly find issues with election systems and basically all the software and hardware that underpins our election system.
AI could also undermine confidence in the electoral process itself.
Even if AI was not used to manipulate hard votes, then it can still be used to undermine faith in the outcome of our elections. And so if a public does not believe the elections were fair, it can also undermine an election in a significant way.
DeRitter notes that the media has historically influenced American voters. He cites a study from Brigham Young University last year that looked at student media consumption.
What can voters do to determine what's true and what's not when they consider voting for the candidate of their choice?
This university did a study where they used AI to analyze media diets, including social media. And it turned out that this kind of diet, media diet we have, is a surprisingly good predictor of election outcomes. So in a way, they say you are what you eat.
A political consultant made news in January after he sent artificial intelligence-generated robocalls mimicking President Joe Biden's voice. He appeared in court last week to face charges of voter suppression and impersonating a candidate. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Californians are feeling the effects of the new minimum wage for fast food workers. It's now $20 an hour and is reflecting in both prices and employment levels. NTD's Christina Corona provides details on this story.
According to new findings by the California Business and Industrial Alliance, California has nearly lost 10,000 fast food jobs since AB 1228's $20 minimum wage was signed into law last year. Ushering in the new $20 minimum wage, a massive increase from the previous $16, has led many companies to take drastic measures. John Kabatek from the National Federation of Independent Business tells California insiders Siamak Karami,
Chipotle, McDonald's, Shake Shack, so many of these franchisees are now having to shut their doors. They're scaling people back and they're laying people off.
Before the law even took effect, economic impacts prompted lawmakers to act. AB 610 was soon introduced, granting exemptions to fast food venues in various locations to address the effects of AB 1228. Despite passing, closures persisted, including Red Lobster and Rubio's Coastal Grill shutting down several locations. The new law may also be tough for small businesses, which may struggle to adapt to the new wage increase.
So on the inside, it puts a small business owner in a very difficult position, now having to raise wages on everybody else, when in fact many may not deserve it at that moment, and there should be a process. Because many of them have been providing great benefits, providing wonderful wages for their workers, but they can't compete with a $20 minimum wage.
Due to the rising wages, many fast food restaurants in California increased their food prices.
The company has to make a profit to stay in business. Those costs are going to get passed along to the customer.
According to data from Kalinowski Equity Research, cited in the New York Post, since the $20 an hour minimum wage law took effect on April 1st, Wendy's has increased prices by approximately 8%. Chipotle has raised prices by 7.5%, Taco Bell by 3%, Burger King by 2%, and Starbucks by about 7% in California. An In-N-Out Double-Double with fries and a drink now costs more than $10 in California. However, in April, In-N-Out Burger's president Lindsay Snyder fought to keep prices down in California. Snyder said she opposed significant price increases in VP meetings, stating, "We can't raise the prices that much. We can't." According to a new study by LendingTree, nearly 80% of Americans see fast food as a luxury and are eating it less often. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss Hunter Biden's verdict is Dante Mills, criminal defense attorney and national trial attorney at Mills and Edwards. Dante, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show. Now, to begin, a Delaware jury has found Hunter Biden guilty on all 3 counts in his federal gun case. Break down the charges for us.
Yes, Tiffany, thank you for having me. So with this case against Hunter Biden, what the allegation was is that he knew he was a drug addict, and he lied on the forms he filled out in order to obtain a firearm. It was really that simple. So the verdict itself, Hunter Biden being found guilty of all 3 of the charges, which include falsifying documents and also possessing that firearm, is not a surprise because the best witness that the prosecution had against Hunter Biden was Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden put out a book where he outlined his drug addiction. He talked about checking himself into rehab. So it was almost impossible for him to say that he did not know that he was addicted to drugs and that he would not be eligible for a gun because he outlined that addiction in the books he wrote. So it's not a surprise that he was found guilty of those charges. And it really was as simple as the prosecutor showing that there was an addiction, that he purchased a gun during the time he was addicted and lied on the forms in order to be able to do so.
And a sentencing date hasn't been set yet, but what can we expect next in this case?
So it's going to take some time. Generally in federal court, where I handle a lot of cases, it's about 120 days in between the time you're found guilty and the time you're sentenced. There's an investigation that has to happen. Just like a lot of people have heard of, former President Donald Trump had his investigation interview yesterday, where they just ask basic interview questions of who he is, what he does, get a background on him so that the judge can get a clear picture of who he's sentencing. In this particular case, Hunter Biden, he's exposed to a lot of jail time. He can go to jail for 10 to 25 years. I don't think it's going to be that kind of time. Similar cases in this situation that I've dealt with, the range is about 1 to 2 years in prison, but jail time is a reality here, and I think is pretty standard for people in this situation. And the judge will get that full picture of Hunter Biden. He now knows what he's guilty of. He'll know his background, and he'll decide what's an appropriate sentence for these crimes.
Now, some legal analysts have said that Hunter Biden can appeal on Second Amendment grounds. Tell us more about that, how it relates to what's called the Bruin test.
Yeah, so that test, and just so everybody knows, we have the right to bear arms in this country. It's the Second Amendment. The first one is the freedom of speech, was the most important thing. And then the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. They wanted to make it clear that every citizen had that right. However, there's been some carvings out of that general statement where you can be found not eligible to have a firearm. A lot of those include being a felon or a convicted felon, but sometimes they include not even just being a convicted felon, but if you're, accused of stalking or something like that, and you have a stay away order of protection, you can't bear arms. So right now in the court, there's this push to have everyone eligible to bear arms. The Bruin case came out because New York specifically, New York State had restrictions that they put on people where you had to show that there was an active threat against you in order to be able to carry a firearm. The Supreme Court says you can't do that. You can't put extra restrictions on people that take away from their right to bear arms. So what some experts are looking at this case and saying is, well, he had an addiction, but other people do drugs, and that does not mean that it takes away their Second Amendment right. I think in this particular case, it's a little different because he did lie on forms. There is that restriction there, but they're pointing to this as maybe a staple case so that there is no qualifications that you need, and the right to bear arms is absolute. Whether or not you sometimes use recreational drugs or any other kind of drugs, that right can't be taken away from you.
Now, President Biden has said he would not pardon his son, even though he has the authority to do so. What do you make of that decision? Do you think it's the right move here?
Tiffany, we have to look at this in two different ways. Are we, as a parent, you say, I have the opportunity, if my son is sentenced to jail time, and it could be significant jail time, to take that off of his plate. But as the president of the United States, do you want to set that example? Do you want to say, I'm going to override the will of the court, the will of the jury, and pardon my son for this crime? So there's a couple of different things that can happen. He could fully pardon, and this is President Joe Biden can fully pardon Hunter Biden and say the crime that he's convicted of, that felony conviction, is no more. And if he does that, then it's all over because it is a federal charge. And as president, President Biden has that authority. Or if he doesn't want to do a full pardon, he could commute the sentence and say, I'm going to leave the the felony charge as an example. But if Hunter Biden is sentenced to jail time, I'm going to commute his sentence and say he does not have to do that jail time. He has that option as well. So we will see. I know that President Biden has said he's not going to do it. That was kind of in theory, though. He said that before the verdict, and then shortly after the verdict, he said he believes in the rule of law. But if Hunter Biden is sentenced to jail for a significant period of time, does President Joe Biden say, I'm going to help my son in this situation because I'm a father first before president? Or does he agree to be a president first and say, I want to make it clear that everybody in this country is going to be held by the same standard and the same rules of law?
Now, Hunter Biden is also facing federal tax charges. This is in a separate case. Does this guilty verdict impact that case in any way?
It does, because what you look at is sentencing. And a couple of things. One, if a jury is selected in that case, obviously because of the publicity involved with this, they will know that Hunter Biden has been convicted of a felony. It wouldn't come in during court, but it will affect him at sentencing if he's found guilty of that tax charge. So what you don't want to do is have multiple felonies because it increases the amount of time that you would have to serve for any penalty. What I believe is going to happen, from my understanding, Hunter Biden in that tax case has already paid those expenses or paid that tax dollar amount down. What I think is going to happen is there's going to be some kind of resolution. If I was representing Hunter Biden, I would be working with the prosecutors in that case to resolve it so I don't have to sit through another trial and run the risk of a judge sentencing me to jail time in both cases. I would try to resolve that case to see if I can get some kind of sentence that includes probation or something where I will not have jail time and I don't have to worry about both cases kind of being piled on at the same time.
Dante Mills, criminal defense attorney and national trial attorney at Mills & Edwards. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
New York City is cracking down on illegal gun trafficking. The latest accused offender is a 24-year-old who allegedly sold firearms from inside a prison cell. NTD's Fiona G. was at the announcement of the indictment.
Today, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg announced the indictment of Hayden Espinoza, who has been accused of allegedly selling illegal firearms online and in his prison cell.
The indictment today against Hayden Espinoza, who we allege sold and attempted to sell weapons and gun parts to an undercover NYPD officer while he was in federal prison. As a result, he is charged in a New York State Supreme Court indictment.
The investigation against Espinoza began in 2022. Authorities say that he ran a Telegram chat called 3D Amendment, through which he was able to sell weapons parts that could be used to make ghost guns, which are guns without serial numbers that cannot be traced. Authorities say many of the buyers in the 3D Amendment chat were racially motivated. There was even a photo showing a man wearing a Nazi armband.
We see this sad and tragic combination far too often of the intersection of gun violence and gun trafficking and hate and extremism.
Officials were also able to link weapons used by the shooter in the 2022 Buffalo supermarket shooting to Espinoza's chat. According to authorities, many of the weapons parts that Espinoza sold were 3D printed, which they say is a growing threat in firearms dealing. Espinoza had already been detained and convicted and was serving a prison term in a federal prison in Louisiana, where he continued to sell firearms out of his prison cell, including to an undercover NYPD officer. After his prison term in Louisiana, Espinoza will be extradited back to New York at the end of this month for his hearing. Fiona G., NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Will Elon Musk get paid? Shareholders will vote Thursday on whether to reinstate his $56 billion pay package. Here's the story.
Elon Musk's $56 billion pay package is at stake. Shareholders will vote Thursday on whether to approve it. Investors launched the plan in 2018, tying the $56 billion to Tesla's market cap, hitting $650 billion and other performance goals. Outside of this, Musk would get no salary.
It's the most radical compensation plan in history. Nobody's ever done it. But he literally gets nothing. And the other thing that's interesting is if he gets to, let's say, $99 billion, he gets nothing. If you get to the next one, if you get to $149 billion, you get nothing. If you get so. But it is truly eat what you kill.
CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin recently posted on X. Without the incentives, he could have easily stepped down as CEO. And then where would have Tesla been? Delaware judge Kathleen McCormick invalidated the package in February, saying it was unfair to shareholders. McCormick said at the time that shareholders were not fully informed when they created the package.
If the shareholders, however, agree upon the package and there's no dispute as to the fairness to them, then there shouldn't be an issue in the Delaware courts.
Attorney Katie Charleston says if the shareholders vote no on Thursday, then it's back to the drawing board. Shareholders may have to come up with a new compensation plan.
Really, the shareholders want Elon Musk and his interest in the company. He has been a person that has driven the innovation and the success of the company. And so they really want to have as much of his attention and involvement as possible.
Tesla says Elon delivered a total shareholder return of over 1,000% in under 6 years. It tells investors they need to vote now to protect both Tesla and their investments.
And Musk today dropping his lawsuit against OpenAI and its top executives, Sam Altman and Greg Brockman. This comes one day after Musk criticized the company over its new partnership with Apple. A dismissal hearing was originally scheduled for tomorrow in San Francisco. The case was dismissed without prejudice, meaning it can be refiled at another time. Musk co-founded OpenAI in 2015, but later sued the company, accusing it of betraying its mission to develop AI for the good of humanity. Musk also debuted his own AI firm called xAI last year. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin over at the Sports Hub. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start on women's basketball, where Team USA clarified their reason for excluding Caitlin Clark from the Olympic team, citing international experience. What's been the reaction to this?
I mean, there hasn't been much more reaction to this. I mean, you could see that experience was a key in picking this squad. I mean, there were 12 players. No one under the age of 26 made the team. You had the oldest as Diana Taurasi. She's 42 years old. This will be her 6th Olympics. And I'll definitely say this, experience is definitely a key when you're choosing these teams. Now, although the courts and the rims are going to be the same in international play, how they call a foul over there can be different to how they call it in the WNBA, so it definitely helps to have people who've played there before. Now, I'll also say experience hasn't always been the #1 factor, though, in picking these teams. I mean, Taurasi, she was a rookie when she made it in 2004. 3 other rookies have also made it. Of course, this committee, I think you can also say they know what they're doing. The women this year, they'll be going for their 8th straight gold medal, so they really dominated women's basketball.
Keeping in WNBA news, the league announced a significant jump in both TV ratings and attendance for the month of May. How much of this can be attributed to Caitlin Clark's popularity?
I mean, I think you can say a pretty big amount. If you're looking at her opening night game between her Fever versus the Connecticut Sun, it drew 2.1 million viewers. That was a record for ESPN2. Just 4 days later, they got 1.7 million viewers on ABC. That was the second most ever on a Disney-owned platform for a WNBA game. Overall, TV viewership is averaging 1.3 million. That's nearly triple last year's viewership. And attendance-wise, this is their highest in 26 years, back to 1998. I think you can also credit rookies Angel Clark and Cameron Brink, though, as well. Those two, along with Clark, ranked in the top 5 in jersey sales in the first week of the WNBA draft. So, but you can still say Clark is driving most of this surge in popularity, I think.
Shifting gears to the NFL, Jets star quarterback Aaron Rodgers is skipping the team's mandatory minicamp. Now, sometimes this move is used as leverage in contract negotiations. Does that seem to be the case here?
No, though I'll admit we're not quite sure what the case is. Now, according to Jets head coach Robert Saleh, Rodgers had warned him in advance that he had a conflicting event with this minicamp. Now, that doesn't mean it's excused. This is going to be an unexcused absence for him. And what that means is he's going to be fined. This is a $50,000 fine just for missing this two-day camp. Now, during this time for the practices, backup Tyrod Taylor will be the Jets' first-team quarterback for these practices.
Moving to NBA news, Boston center Kristaps Porzingis suffered what looked like another leg injury in their win Sunday. What is his status going forward for Wednesday night's game?
Yeah, he is listed as day-to-day with what the team is calling a rare injury. He has a torn retinaculum in his leg. Now, I've never actually heard of that injury before, but it allows dislocation of a tendon. Now, if he can't go, the Celtics are surely going to rely on Al Horford to take his place. Now, this is actually where the Celtics really show how balanced they are. They can handle this injury probably better than anyone else. Now, I want to show you on offense here, at least what I'm talking about. This is shot attempts per player in the NBA Finals here. Only one player, this is Jason Tatum, is shooting even more than 20% of the team's overall shots. He's shooting 23%. You've got Jaylen Brown here, Drew Holiday, and Derek White, and all others at 31%. Basically, a very balanced team. Basically, who's ever open is shooting the ball. Now, contrast that with Dallas. It's a much different story here. Now, of course, you've got Luka Doncic here taking 30% of their shots. He's, of course, the NBA's leading scorer. They want him to doing that. And they also want Kyrie Irving. This is a very top-heavy team. Irving taking 22% of the shots in those first two games. Unfortunately, Irving was a little bit off in Boston. He just got 35% from the floor, missed all 8 of his three-point shots. I'm sure the crowd booing him at every chance that he touched the ball probably had something to do with that. But you know what? If they don't, let's look at these side by side now. If they don't get Kyrie Irving going, it's very hard to see them with him taking that many shots. Meanwhile, versus the Celtics balance, even without Porzingis, you've still got to give the slight edge to the Celtics here because of that balance. Now, Game 3 is going to be Wednesday night in Dallas with the Celtics leading 2-0 in this series.
Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.